But of course, he's trying to leverage the Invictus Games, which the government has given money to, because after all, it's a very worthwhile cause for injured servicemen, with his own return with Meghan, who will use it to promote herself. What more will she do to get... And what more can Harry do, because he's down now to one charity? That's it now, once every 2 years.
I mean, yeah, I guess we are just kind of sitting around waiting for the rains.
We're waiting for an explosion.
Yeah, exactly.
What happens when the one project holding Prince Harry's public identity together starts cracking in full view? According to this source, the answer is panic, pressure, and a controversy that Tom Bower has pushed into the spotlight. For years, the Invictus Games have been presented as a powerful humanitarian sanctuary, a place where wounded veterans could reclaim confidence, dignity, and purpose. But the source argues that behind the emotional footage, polished appearances, and carefully controlled publicity, a far more uncomfortable picture is emerging. The questions are brutal. Is Invictus still centered on wounded veterans, or has it become something increasingly shaped around the personal image of Harry and Meghan Markle? And if the foundation beneath the brand is weakening, what exactly is Prince Harry fighting to protect?
Went to Vancouver to the last Invictus Games, thinking this is a great organization, but what really happens? And it is vast. I mean, it's very expensive. Vancouver hosted it in a huge convention center. But I was actually appalled by the following. First of all, there were over 2,000 helpers, all dressed in yellow. The number of spectators was tiny. Secondly, there are 500 competitors, but about 1,500 members of their families. So all paid for by the governments.
Wow.
So, free food, free accommodation. For those 500, it's terrific.
Right.
But what I really found, I suppose I'd say bogus, is that in the wheelchair competition, which I watched, between America and Nigeria, the American team were professional coach team. And they all wheeled themselves onto the court, as did the Nigerians. None of the Americans had a physical disability. They all had all their limbs. They beat the Nigerians 24-0 because they were a professionally coached team. And then they wheeled themselves off into an adjoining area.
To understand why the pressure is building, the source turns directly to what Tom Bower reportedly witnessed during the Vancouver edition. The Invictus Games are marketed as a massive international sporting event dedicated to men and women who suffered catastrophic, life-altering injuries while serving their countries. Millions of viewers are invited to see extraordinary competitors overcoming extraordinary circumstances. Yet the scene described by Bower was almost surreal. The event took place inside an enormous, expensive convention center, surrounded by thousands of enthusiastic volunteers wearing bright yellow uniforms. Then came the detail that changes the entire atmosphere. The spectator stands were described as virtually empty. Outside of approximately 1,500 people, mostly immediate family members of competitors, the arena was portrayed as a ghost town. And suddenly, the question becomes impossible to ignore. How can an event command enormous venues' production crews, technology, lighting, and promotional machinery while leaving so many seats vacant? Then came the wheelchair basketball controversy. Bower reportedly observed competitions involving teams such as USA and Nigeria. Athletes rolled onto the court, competed, and then, according to the source, some supposedly disabled players stood from their wheelchairs and walked away once they were outside the camera's view. The source further claims that out of roughly 500 participants, only about 4 to 5% had serious visible physical injuries such as amputations, while many others were listed with minor or non-visible service conditions. It also alleges that able-bodied athletes were professionally coached to fill out rosters.
The other charitable stuff is not happening. Centre Barley, he's lost control of it. The Archwell Foundation has effectively been shuttered. All he's got is Invictus. And yet even that, based upon the journalism of yours that I've been reading, is slipping through his fingers.
It's a problem, but also let's not forget, Sentabali is gone, but they're still suing him. So TikTok, when is that case coming up for defamation? And
The emotional contradiction becomes even sharper when the source turns to the public perception surrounding severely wounded heroes. Viewers are asked to imagine people at home opening their wallets, donating because they believe they are supporting veterans whose physical sacrifices are visible and devastating, while footage appears to show wheelchair basketball players standing and walking afterward. The source acknowledges that non-visible injuries are real, but its accusation is about presentation. If global marketing repeatedly emphasizes extreme physical sacrifice while the event itself appears almost empty and includes competitors whose injuries may not be visibly apparent, then the gap between perception and reality becomes the story. And this is where the source shifts its focus away from the veterans themselves and toward Harry and Meghan Markle. The argument is not against the veterans, who deserve absolute honor and respect. Instead, the accusation is that the platform surrounding them has changed. The source describes the Invictus Games as having moved from a focused military initiative toward what it calls the Meghan Markle show. At Vancouver, the source says media attention was allegedly pulled toward headline entertainment, including Katy Perry, followed by Meghan appearing beside Harry, dramatic public displays of affection, and designer clothing worth tens of thousands of dollars. Then comes the detail the source treats as its most revealing clue. When Meghan reportedly left the venue to deal with the sudden PR crisis in California, media attention allegedly disappeared with her. The cameras, according to this narrative, were no longer interested. The question hanging over the entire controversy is therefore brutally simple. If the Invictus Games are supposed to be about veterans, why does the source portray the spotlight as following Meghan Markle instead? That contradiction is presented as the first major crack in the image of an organization that was once almost untouchable. Now the financial numbers surrounding the upcoming 2027 Invictus Games in Birmingham pushed this controversy into an even darker territory. The UK government has pledged a staggering £29 million in public taxpayer support, with the expectation that Harry and his team would match or exceed that commitment through corporate sponsorships and major donors. But as the clock moves closer to the return to British soil, the fundraising picture described in the source looks disastrous. Out of the multi-million-pound target required to balance the budget, Harry's team has reportedly raised only £4 million, and the summer 2024 promotional trip to the UK, presented as a major corporate donor summit, allegedly failed to deliver the sponsors needed. Companies including Boeing reportedly backed away, while the source claims corporate boards are looking at Montecito and deciding that the risks are simply too great. Then comes the number that makes the entire situation look even more explosive: £60 million for roughly 500 participants. The source contrasts that figure with veteran programs operated by the U.S. Department of Defense, where spending is publicly audited and itemized. Suddenly, the question becomes unavoidable. Why would major corporations commit enormous sums when financial documents are heavily redacted and the cost structure remains so difficult for outsiders to understand? The source even raises questions about private jets, five-star hotel suites, and security expenses involving Harry and Meghan. While the organization allegedly struggles to raise ordinary operating funds, taxpayers are being asked to support a £29 million commitment while Britain faces its own financial pressures. That contradiction is impossible to ignore. The discussion then turns to Paula and the question of branding itself. The blunt argument is that without Invictus, there is no Harry, while another voice insists that Invictus desperately needs oversight. Someone, the source argues, should be able to explain exactly where the money goes and why £60 million is required for 500 people. The comparison with the Department of Defense becomes another uncomfortable clue, particularly when insurance and competitor welfare are discussed, including Scott Snow and the Düsseldorf event. Yet the central complaint remains the same: documents are redacted, expenses are difficult to understand, and the public is left asking, what is going on? From there, the reputational crisis becomes personal. Longtime supporters and veteran organizations are described as calling Invictus a tainted brand, not because of the competitors, but because of leadership decisions surrounding Prince Harry. The Invictus board of directors is portrayed by insiders as being filled with Harry's loyalists, while senior figures who allegedly questioned budgets, transparency, or Meghan's involvement were forced out, fired by Harry himself, or resigned. A public petition demanding Harry's removal from the board has reportedly gathered thousands of signatures, with angry supporters saying donations should stop until the Markles are gone. The source then proposes Mike and Zara Tindall as figures who could restore credibility without turning wounded veterans into a Netflix backdrop. And just when the financial crisis appears bad enough, the upcoming 2027 Birmingham Games introduce an entirely different nightmare. Birmingham has a large Muslim population, while the Games are scheduled to include an official military team from Israel. That combination, the source argues, demands sophisticated diplomacy, elite security planning, and experienced geopolitical advisors. Yet Harry is portrayed as having alienated the seasoned royal diplomats who once surrounded him, leaving him dependent on Hollywood PR representatives and yes men. The warning becomes even more dramatic when the discussion suggests the possibility of serious trouble surrounding the Israeli team. At the same time, the veterans themselves are praised as heroes who risked their lives and deserve respect. But the central question returns, has Invictus itself become a tainted brand, and is Harry the problem? The answer offered is brutally direct: Harry is the problem. But petitions mean nothing unless the board actually votes him out. That brings the controversy to Harry's next battle, security. Instead of resolving the organization's operational questions, the source claims Harry is using his upcoming UK trip to pressure the British government for tax-funded armed police protection for himself, Meghan, and their children. Tom Bauer is presented as describing this obsession as a self-serving attempt to save money and restore royal status. The source goes even further, dismissing the alleged danger to Meghan or the children and portraying the real concern as unwanted photographs. By 2026, the wider picture is presented as a collapsing portfolio. The Archwell Foundation is described as stagnant, media deals have reportedly expired or collapsed, and legal battles involving British newspaper publishers are portrayed as creating potential liabilities of £10 million to £20 million. That leaves Invictus as the one major operational platform still connecting Prince Harry to a public identity. Lose Invictus, and the source argues, and what remains is a former royal living in California with his relevance dramatically diminished. That explains the desperate media offensive in the Mirror, including the demand, "Let the world see us together," apparently aimed at forcing King Charles into a public appearance. The source argues that Harry needs the monarchy's credibility because corporate donors, governments, and charities may no longer trust his personal brand. Yet King Charles, the British public, and the international veteran community are portrayed as seeing through the strategy. And then comes the possible lifeline, South Korea, reportedly considering a future addition and committing tens of millions of dollars. But even that escape route brings another controversy, with concerns about enormous travel costs, accessibility for wheelchair users, and the possibility of sports washing if controversial regimes use Prince Harry's royal title to polish their international image. Strip away the speeches, the polished videos, and the spectacle, and one question remains hanging over everything: how long can Prince Harry claim Invictus is thriving if the foundation beneath it is allegedly cracking? The veterans deserve a platform built around their courage, not celebrity spectacle. Tom Bauer's revelations, as presented here, therefore become more than another royal controversy. They become a warning about what happens when the last pillar of a public identity begins to shake. And if the board really wants Harry out, the most explosive question is no longer whether the crisis exists. It is whether anyone inside Invictus is finally willing to act.